Yeah, so I'll be presenting about a mate selection strategy for long-term genetic gain that's based around this mindset of haplotype stacking. So if we sort of divide the genome up into chunks or blocks, and we're able to calculate the genetic value of the haplotypes our breeding population carries for those different chunks of genome, then we would see that, probably the ranking of those genotypes might not be the same. Which one's the best might not be the same for every block in the genome and might not be the same as their overall breeding values. And if we're already thinking in terms of blocks, we can go, oh, what's the most effective use of the diversity in this breeding population? What would be the best we could do with this? It would be that somewhere down the line, down the generations, we would be able to produce something, a genotype that carries in each of those blocks the best haplotype we had in our breeding population. Right, so in our previous work, we looked at a parent selection method that we called optimal haplotype stacking, or OHS. And this was sort of a method that would, out of a bigger pool of candidates, pick you a set of parents you should use because they contained good haplotypes at different blocks in the genome that you would really like to assemble together. And we simulated this method in a closed breeding pool, just recurrent applications of the method in sort of a fast recurrent selection loop, and found that it gave you really good long-term genetic gains, but at a very slow and steady rate of gain, at a very slow and steady pace. But the thinking was, so this method, OHS, only chooses you parents whose haplotypes could assemble into a really good stack. It doesn't actually tell you how you could stack those together or give you guidance on how you could produce that stack. So the idea of this particular work was, can we come up with a mate selection method that will allocate crosses, that will pair up our parents in a way that will that'll help encourage us to be able to stack these haplotypes together. So the mate selection method that I'll be talking about, I've sort of based it around two principles, two factors, and I'll take you through those two first. These are sort of the two things we're going to base this mate selection idea method on. And the first one was, we think the crossing plan should contain desirable haplotypes at every block of the genome, if possible. A better crossing plan would be something like C, because the best stack of those haplotypes we could get from C contains more of our sort of desirable green haplotypes than crossing plan A or B. So we want good haplotypes at every block in the genome, if possible. That's going to be one of the principles of our mate selection method. The second one, we just want to sort of make it as likely as possible that we succeed in stacking up those good haplotypes. And so if we have these two example F1s here, they've all inherited one good haplotype from one parent for every block in the genome, but which one's more likely to actually be able to pass down all of those good haplotypes? By far it's A, because A there just needs that one recombination to produce a gamete that's all green. B needs 6 in 6 specific spots, and really that's getting to the point of unlikelihood where you're going to assume that B is not going to be able to pass down all of those green haplotypes. So even though B's parents carried all of those target haplotypes, you're going to lose some of them when you cross B. So what we really want is our mate selection algorithm to, as much as possible, we would like our adjacent haplotype blocks, when we're carrying good haplotypes, to be in coupling phase as early as possible. So if we take these two principles, I've sort of said this mate selection strategy, let's call it a block extension strategy, and maybe that'll become clear as I explain it a little bit more. So basically we've got a strategy that will, if we given some crossing plan between our parents, it will give it a score, and then we can use some optimization method, some evolutionary algorithm to evaluate a bunch of different crossing plans and find one that scores highly. So for our candidate crossing plan, the first thing we do is we go through every haplotype block in every parent, mark them out as either target haplotypes or not. I guess you would have some flexibility in what criteria you use for this. If we're using the OHS parent selection method I talked about in the beginning, it already tells you what haplotypes it thinks it wants to assemble together. So after you've marked that off, go through every pair that will be crossed together and find the longest run of contiguous blocks where at least one parent is carrying a desirable haplotype. And the plan would be 2 generations down the line, you really want those to all be in coupling phase together so that we get more genotypes like A than like the zigzag genotype B from the previous slide. So these are the sort of blocks that we're hoping to extend if we recurrently apply this mate selection algorithm. Then for every block in the genome, we're going to count up the number of runs that cover that block. And to be clear, any target haplotypes that aren't included in a longest run are just not contributing to the score at all. So we've counted those up, then we cap each of those counts at 2 just because we also don't want a crossing plan to score highly by having every pair contributing haplotypes in the same blocks. And that was for our first criteria we based this method on, first factor. Sum those up for the final score. When I was testing this out, I used a genetic algorithm to evaluate the different crossing plans and choose the best one for a given set of parents. And I'll show you some results we got from testing this out in simulation. So this was, again, it was a very simple, rapid recurrent selection loop. We take a set of parents, we apply the mate selection method to get a crossing plan, simulate some families, select out of those families, maybe using our parent selection method, OHS, and then that population just becomes the parents of the next generation. This was simulated in genomic simulation. For founders, we used 50 inbred wheat lines, and the marker effects were also just being treated as true breeding values, so another sort of simplification in this simulation. But so the results might look something like this. Over sort of 30 generations or 30 cycles of applying this selection procedure, with the OHS parent selection method and random crossing, you get about this much genetic gain. With that block extension crossing algorithm, it's this much. So it's a higher rate of gain. That's pretty nice. We can't say that just because this method is doing better than random crossing that it's definitely a worthwhile choice, because there's plenty of other mate selection algorithms out there. And I'm not going to be able to show all of them because you have pretty much a huge, almost infinite choice of what you're going to target in these mate selection algorithms. So I've got 2 sample ones here. I'm just going to mention, I'm not saying that these are the best possible performance of mate selection algorithms in these families. I'm just using them as example comparisons here. So we've got one optimal contributions mate selection algorithm, and I'm saying that because I'm not giving it complete free choice of the parents. It's still only getting to work with the parents selected by our OHS parent selection method, but it's doing pretty well. Giving us some higher rates of gain there for that particular OCS target. And we've also got this prober criterion, which is one of the, it's from the sort of family of usefulness criterion mate selection methods. And picked this one specifically because it gives us a pretty good rate of gain for this more diverse parent population that it often has to work with in these simulations. But it's getting pretty much the exact same rate of gain as our block extension crossing. They do actually differ in this other figure, which this is the plot of if you took at each generation the best haplotypes for each genome block. And so if you were able to do the stack with the best possible haplotypes existing each generation, what would the breeding value of that ultimate stack be? And you can see they all lose a little bit of useful diversity over time, but that block extension crossing method is maintaining more of those good haplotypes than even the prober criterion, which had the same rate of gain. Does this actually matter? Well, it might matter if you were continuing this program for more cycles, or if you were selecting a little bit harder on the parents so that it really mattered. You were really getting close to the limits of the diversity in your breeding population. Because I don't know, I emphasized this really, we are again simulating a completely closed breeding population and not even any mutation to add in new diversity. We could simulate that out. We've changed the parent selection method to sort of a balanced family selection, take the best offspring from each family and run it out to 50 cycles instead of 30. And now you can see distinction between those methods. So this OCS target is obviously maybe selecting a little bit too hard in this situation, high initial gains, but it runs out of diversity. We can also see towards the end of this program that block extension mate selection strategy is starting to outperform the PROBA1. And if we plot it against the selection limit again, we can also see that that block extension method would be able to continue giving you genetic gains for the longest if you continue this further, because it has the most useful diversity remaining. So, final notes. If you're going for long-term genetic gain, you want to have some useful diversity. One way of sort of measuring or tracking your useful diversity would be whether your population still contains these good haplotype blocks that you would like to stack together. And secondly, this sort of block extension strategy for mate selection that I've been discussing, at least in the simulations run so far, decreases the rate of loss of useful diversity, decreases the rate of loss of helpful haplotypes, and that helps you increase the long-term genetic gain. Thank you.